Bear Brothers, the Vireon Saga, Part 6, Thunder Spirits, Bonds Forged in Battle. As always in the aftermath of battle, the work of recovery was bittersweet, elation at the victory tempered by mourning for lost comrades. In this case, the tragedy of the great company's collapse was more than any of the surviving Space Wolves had ever endured. But there was work to be done, and there was no time for wallowing in shame. And there was cause to rejoice. While searching the wrecked cruiser, several pockets of surviving thralls and bondsmen were discovered. Even a squad of undefeated bloodclaws had been found barricaded in a training hall, unconscious from blood loss. Dozens of dead warp spawn were piled at the entrance. As is the way when space wolves are assailed by the powers of the warp, several of the terrible wolfen were encountered. To their credit, these warriors had not fallen to chaos, but the protection afforded by the curse of the wolfen came at a terrible price. No space wolf had remained unchallenged by the call of the beast within, but only a few had been overcome by it. Fortunately, some of those found their sanity again, but many who did not escaped into the vast forest wilderness. The wolf priests detained those they could lay hold of, as per custom. All in all, many more bondsmen, servitors, and Astartes had endured than expected. All told, only around a third had been lost. Even some of the Vireon search party had survived. Of the Space Wolves, the Wolf Guard had borne the heaviest losses. To the warriors' great sorrow, none of their sacred Fenrisian wolves had survived. Not even the powerful Thunder Wolves. Finally, with losses counted and the dead interred, there was opportunity for the wolves to speak to the Vireon tribesmen. With the help of the Vireon 3rd Platoon survivors, who knew the native tongue, they were able to learn much. The tribesmen had seen the great ship falling from the sky and believed the Thunder Spirits had brought their eternal battle to the ground. It was obvious to them that the Chaos Marines, twisted and brutal, were the enemy. The Space Wolves, on the other hand, appeared familiar and noble. With their furs and fetishes and runes, there was no mistaking the kinship. When they saw the emblems upon their armor, depicting what they took to be representations of bears, they did not hesitate to lend their aid. There were no wolves or dogs on Vireo, but the clans all held the enormous Vireon bears sacred. They had even witnessed these huge warriors transform themselves into bearkin during the heat of battle. There was no questioning that these great warriors were spirits from the clouds. From that first battle onward, they pledged themselves to the service of the bear warriors. This attitude and belief was not so different than how the people of Fenris regarded the Space Wolves, and it did not trouble the Marines. The true nature of the Astartes would be explained eventually, but it was now time for the company to turn its attention to other deeds. Time to do what they should have done in the first place. Time to discover the fate of the Imperial colony. Leaving most of their forces at the wreck site to continue the work of salvage, a contingent of Marines and the surviving guardsmen departed for Jegan's station, guided by willing tribesmen. After a journey of several days, they made contact with refugees from the colony. This was when they discovered how much time they had lost in the warp. The last 41 years had been brutal for the people of Vireo. The Orcs had reduced the population to refugees and rabble. Jegan's station was a ghost town. There was no order or government. The human survivors were scattered and split into factions, rebels, loyalists, tribesmen, and everything in between. It was all they could do to stay alive, and each had stuck to their own, making stands or fleeing together in their groups. However, considering the threat they faced for a generation, it was incredible that there were any humans left on the planet at all. Thanks for the most part to the native Vireon tribes, they had held off the Orcs for 4 decades. But things were getting bad again. The Orcs had plundered the Jegan's shipyards and had built themselves Dakar jets, bombers, and transport vehicles. It was only a matter of time before they put something together that could achieve escape velocity and return to their cruisers in orbit. Once that happened, all hell would rain down, and the fight for Vireo would be over. Runners and scouts were sent to spread word to all the colonial survivors that the Adeptus Astartes had come to their aid, and they should collect any livestock and all their goods and gather at the crash site. When the situation was fully assessed, the rescue contingent rejoined their brothers there. The valley where the dead cruiser came to rest was known as Nalsroth from then on. This may have been the name of the strike cruiser, or perhaps the fallen Wolf Lord, but all these things are hidden now. The Marines back at the landing site had had their hands full. Orc salvage parties had made several attempts to plunder the wrecked cruiser. There had never been such a tempting pile of gubbins, guts, and daka. They could build a gargant if they could loot even a fraction of it. Even the rebels had tried their hand liberating some weapons and gear. That did not go well for them, and they fled back to their mountain fortresses and did not trouble the Astartes again. After a few months, it seemed that all who could join the Space Wolves at Nalsroth had done so. Thousands had come, and it seemed only the staunchest rebels had declined. Many refugees had brought armor and weapons that once belonged to the armory and guards of the Imperial fortress. Though the strike cruiser had settled on its flight decks, and every aircraft aboard had been crushed or damaged beyond repair, several tanks and land speeders were recovered. Many of the vital parts of the ship were intact. Most fortunately, the precious gene seed vats were safe and uncontaminated. The infirmary was undamaged. The majority of armories and crafting stations were unharmed. Even the revered ancient dreadnought, who had accompanied the Crusaders on the Great Hunt and had remained in stasis throughout the ordeal, was found awakened but unabused, along with many company relics and sacred totems. All of these great machines and instruments of war were put to good use. It was time to take the fight to the Orcs. The Wolfguard champion was elected to assume leadership of the Great Company. As Wolf Lord, he led the combined forces of colonists, natives, and Astartes in what turned out to be a long campaign against the Gloomskull Orcs, who had managed to consolidate all the other tribes under their banner. This alliance played no small role in the Orc resurgence that was about to arise. Early in the campaign, the Space Wolves delivered the chief rebel stronghold from an extended Gloomskull siege. Though they were heretic rebels, the Wolf Lord, knowing the history of the people, and the Wolves having their own strong misgivings about the Terran leadership, offered them mercy. His offer: capitulate and rejoin, or be destroyed. Ronan, now an old man, still led what was left of the insurgents. Imperial governance had long since ended on Vireo, and the exterminators had never come. These Space Wolves had acted honorably, and in any case, there was no other choice. He accepted the terms gladly, and the rebels joined the human alliance, bringing much experience and value with them. Having brokered peace between all factions, the Space Wolves brought the united might of all the humans of the continent against the Orcs. They had every expectation of wiping them out quickly and totally, but that would not be the case. As the months stretched into years, it became apparent to the Space Wolves that they were trapped on Vireo. Means of interstellar communication were long since destroyed. All the company's astropaths had perished in the warp. Only the Orcs had the means to escape the planet. But the Orcs had no intention of leaving. Space Marines were good fighting, and now there was something worthy of their attention. They agitated themselves into a thundering craze. Ensconced in their caves and forts, they were nearly impossible to root out, and their numbers kept growing. But eventually, the combined human forces were victorious. Incorporating the native tactics that had held off the Orcs for decades, the Space Wolves drove back the hordes and demolished their War before it could truly begin. Over the years, the Gloomskull mechs had managed to build several small ships capable of piercing the atmosphere. The defeated war boss took as many of his followers as he could fit on the Landus, and finally rejoined the waiting fleet above. At this moment, the Orcs had the capacity to rain great destruction from orbit, but instead they departed the system, and the people of Vireo rejoiced. The remaining Orcs who could not fit on the Landus, or were not interested in leaving, were collectively known as the Stragglers. These stragglers retreated again to the Blackleg strongholds, where they soon devolved into surly tribes and began their quarrelsome internal power struggles all over again. Finally, with all their enemies routed, the Space Wolf Great Company and its remarkable human entourage were able to breathe easy.